All right, folks, live from the studio, I'm Jimmy Solesky. And today, I know we spent a lot of time earlier in the week talking about, statistical things. We talked about the Georgia election of 2020 just this Monday, 4 years almost after the fact. We discussed, what did we discuss on Tuesday? Oh, the options that the Democrats have for this election. There's not many, but there are a few. You can go and check out that video. And of course, yesterday, we delved into the recent emails that have surged or emerged implicating Anthony Fauci and his associates in pretty much an obviously orchestrated cover-up of the COVID lab leak theory. Which leads us to today. Today is Thursday. And this is a little thing I like to call, as of 20 minutes ago, Thursday Thoughts. Today, I just want to deliver some thoughts on a topic that vexes me so. And I was inspired to speak upon this topic listening to Alex Jones earlier, as most people are inspired to speak on topics. And this topic, of course, is, it's kind of hard to put an exact name on it. I'm going to call it, as an overarching theme, playing God. There's many ways to play God. There's many examples of how this is done. We see it with the rise of artificial intelligence, AI. We see it with vaccine technologies, just the pharmaceutical industry in general. More so than anything, I would say probably the most blatant and in-your-face example of this is the automation of nearly everything, which kind of leads hand in hand into universal basic income, which we'll dive into a little bit today. But all of these are examples in my mind of playing God. And I'll explain why, obviously. It'd be weird if I didn't. The video that I listened to, because I don't know how to watch Alex Jones. I guess you have to be a subscriber to InfoWars. I'm not sure. I haven't gone that far off the deep end yet. I'll let you know when I do. But the video that I listened to came straight out of Israel themselves. Everyone's favorite country these days. Who doesn't love Israel? This was Netanyahu demonstrating this sort of 3D printer of meat. So basically, the way it works is you put animal cells and different, fat muscle cells and different kinds of things like that. And then you can just input like what you want into the machine. Like, I want a steak. I want a fish fillet. What's she order? Fish fillet? And within 1 minute, it will print you that meat. And this is being pursued as an innovation to ostensibly help with carbon emissions, cut down on farming, livestock farming, which pollute the environment apparently, and things like that. And to be honest, it's kind of hard to say that that's a bad thing on the surface. Now, Alex Jones is saying, it's not meat. It's not meat. It's a clone of cells, toxic. Maybe. And I agree. It's not technically meat, but what is meat technically? If you clone an animal, for instance, is that animal not an animal? Well, that's a question we've been asking for a long time. There's movies about that. There's movies about when we get so good at creating artificial intelligence that we create robots like an Ex Machina, or is it Ex Machina? I don't know. That movie. At what point do these robots, these artificial intelligences, become living beings? That's kind of the debate that we've been contending with for a while. But as far as artificially produced food sources, meat, I imagine they're going to do the same thing with produce. I wouldn't know why. Let's just focus on meat. It's more interesting. It's more cool. I couldn't exactly explain to you off the top of my head what's wrong with it. I just know intuitively that something is wrong with it. And the reason I know intuitively that something is wrong with it is because historically speaking, anytime human beings attempt to play the role of God, there's something wrong with it. Now, as I mentioned earlier, yesterday we discussed the gain of function research that ultimately pretty much is a universally accepted yet brushed off truth, that the gain of function research that was funded by our government and carried out in Chinese laboratories and U.S. laboratories, but ultimately leaked out of the Chinese Wuhan Institute of Virology, led to the rise of COVID-19, the SARS-CoV-2 coronavirus. And the reason that happened was because in an attempt to preemptively prevent the cross-species transmission of these bat coronaviruses that they saw had potential to jump species and infect humans, they did what's called gain-of-function research, where they genetically modify these viruses in a laboratory to make them able to infect humans. They observe what happens when they infect these human cells, and now that, in theory, allows us to contend with this should it ever happen in real life. But here's the problem. As we mentioned, that caused a global pandemic. So in an attempt to prevent a global pandemic, in an attempt to play God, the scientists created exactly that which they were trying to avoid. Now, I'm not going to get back into COVID today, but I feel like that is the most poignant, if that's how you pronounce it, poignant. It's like lasagna, poignant. Real G's moving silent like poignant. That is the most poignant example that I can think of at this very moment to illustrate how science and really humanity in general is getting to a point where we are attempting to create God. A guest on the show, the podcast, a long time ago, he's a frequent guest, but this particular episode was with Dark Mark quite some time ago, a few years ago. And he said just that. He said, we are creating God. And I never really thought of it that way. But people talk about artificial intelligence, and what if it got to the point where artificial intelligence became so good that we would no longer have to rely on our own logic, our own reasoning, our own ability to argue a point or to push the world in a certain direction. We could instead rely on the infinite wisdom of this machine learning technology. Now that, in theory, seems good. In theory. Just like the idea of, as I touched upon, universal basic income seems good. The idea that, look, everybody gets a base salary, let's say, at which point it's up to you if you decide you want to work for more. And people make economic arguments for this one way or the other. Andrew Yang was a very perhaps the most popular proponent of this. I believe he kind of peaked in his fame. Not that he's like unfamous now, but I think he kind of peaked in his fame during, I want to say, the 2020, if not the 2016 election. He ran as some party, I don't know. But his big thing was universal basic income. And I found that to be a very compelling idea because I acknowledge, as do most people, that the trend of technology seems to lead in a direction that human beings are becoming more and more obsolete. And what I mean by that is that unskilled labor, quote unquote, unskilled labor, manual labor, things that you could easily program a machine to do instead. What happens to those jobs? You have the population increasing exponentially. And you have the amount of jobs necessary to keep the population going decreasing exponentially. People would argue that people will say, well, look, we always find new ways. Like, yeah, sure. People argued that, when the car was invented, that was going to take away from this type of industry or that type of industry. But then it created a whole new industry. But the difference is at that time, you still needed human beings to perform the tasks. And there's a lot of even circumstances surrounding the Industrial Revolution and how factory work, the kind of what they call compartmentalization of labor, I think that's the term, separation of labor, or whatever it is, where in the factory format kind of instituted by Henry Ford, people lost touch with the final product. So instead of you being a guy who like makes cabinets, or you make chairs, or you make stagecoaches or whatever, you instead are in a factory where your job is not anything other than you're the wheel guy. You make the wheels. The other guy does the tires. The other guy works on the engine. The other guy works on the interior. And at the end of the whole process, you have 100 different people involved, let's say, and that makes one car. And no individual person in that process feels any sort of identity with the final product. The wheel guy sees the wheels. The interior guy sees the seats. The hood guy sees the hood. But overall, there's not a single one of them that feels any sense of connection to what they do. And you see this in corporate America as well. You see people working in these giant cubicle office buildings where each one of them has a set of basically tedious, mundane tasks to perform, a very specific set of responsibilities. And the company runs off that, but every individual in there is not really secure in the idea, for the most part, at least at the lower levels. There's no feeling of being necessarily. There's no sense of purpose in that environment, other than this is what I do. I show up and I push these pencils. He shows up and he pushes these pencils, and I keep getting a paycheck. And that seems awesome, I guess. When I was young and I hated school, I would fantasize about how awesome it would be to have a job where I really didn't have to do anything. I remember watching the movie Independence Day. And that's the one with Will Smith where with the aliens, and he punches the alien. Welcome to Earth, bitch. And in one of the opening scenes, there's a guy on like the space shuttle that's supposed to be like monitoring, I guess, if aliens are coming to Earth or not, whatever he was doing. And he's up there just playing like putt-putt in his space shuttle, not really doing anything. And then I said, wow, that seems so cool. Just like chilling. That's your job. You just fucking around, hanging out. And I remember my dad said, Jim, why is that your goal, to just do nothing? Now, at the time, I was 8 or 9. So I don't know. It was probably my goal to do nothing and not have a real job, Dad, because I was 8 or 9 years old. I don't think most kids fantasize about having a whole bunch of desk work and shit to do when they're older. But as I've gotten older, I've realized that actually it was really just school that I hated, because school, the public education system that I was enrolled to, was set up in the exact same format as the corporate office structure. You're going there 5 days a week. You're in school for 6.5 hours a day. That's not that far off from a work day. The average work day is 8 hours, 9 to 5. High school is like 6-something hours, 8 to 3. Is that right? Yeah, 8 to 2:30, whatever. And you go to your different classes and you're learning a bunch of subjects that I almost feel like it's purposely made to be as mundane and boring and uncompelling as possible. because what they're really doing is they're training factory workers. If you notice the grading system in the education system, I remember in Baltimore County Public Schools, that is, at least, and I'm sure this goes for everywhere, 50% of your grade was classwork. 25% of your grade was homework, usually. And somewhere lower than 25%, let's call it 15 to 25% max, was quizzes and tests. Now, classwork is mostly just showing up and graded off of completion. Did you do the assignment or did you not? Same with homework. Most of homework was graded off of completion. So if you're doing, and I remember classwork was mandatory 50% of the grade, and homework was mandatory around that ballpark as well. So the system itself set it up so that only a very small percentage of your grade in school was actually knowing the substance of the class you're taking. That would be tests and quizzes, right? So you could get a 75%, a C, a passing grade in public school for all intents and purposes without knowing anything about what you're actually learning. As long as you show the ability to show up and do what they tell you to do, and then go home and do the homework and more shit that they tell you to do on your own time, which I think homework is insane bullshit. You're graduating with a C average, which these days is more than enough to get into some stupid school, college, whatever. And so even just that system itself tells you that, well, actually, this is more about just seeing if I would make a good employee. They're not really interested in how well I know math or chemistry or physics. You have to take a final exam, but as I recall, you can fail the final exam and still pass the class as long as you had a good enough grade to, counteract your failing final exam. So you're sending people out of high school into the world not even concerned on any level if they actually know any of the stuff they learned in high school. Why? Because that's not an actual concern. The actual concern is, have we conditioned you over the course of 12 years, and now kindergarten too, because I don't know if you heard about this, but kindergarten is also a 6-hour day. Used to be a half day. You would be the AM 3 hours or the PM 3 hours in kindergarten when I was that age. Now, at the age of 4 or 5 years old, whenever kindergarten starts for most kids, it's a 6-hour day. You get to spend the first 4 years of your life hanging out at your parents' house, or most likely these days at daycare or preschool. And then at the age of 5 years old, boom, 6 hours a day in a forced learning environment. So let's call it 13 years, actually, of conditioning. And then you go into college or the workforce, and that's really what they care about. And so I looked at the entire world that way, and I thought, I don't want to be doing this shit for the rest of my life. I'd rather just do nothing. And I think it's suffice to say I've at least achieved that. Congratulations. But going back to the point at hand, despite the fact that we are conditioned to believe that life is really just about playing your role, getting a paycheck, and then having the weekend or your free time after work to actually live your life. That's really not ideal. And people figure that out pretty shortly after entering into the workforce. They go in, they get their real big person job. It's cool for like the first year or two. And then this sudden realization hits you that this is the rest of your life. This is all there is. And some people are fine with that because they've never been taught to expect anything more. And some people are depressed and anxious about that reality, whether they know it or not. And they They deal with that with pharmaceuticals. Oh, you're not depressed because you live in a meaningless, you live a purposeless life in a job that you don't really care about, and that's what you spend 40 plus hours a week of your life doing. And then you get like 2 days to like live your actual life, or really just recover for Monday. No, you have a chemical imbalance, so take this pill. So now we have a bunch of people who are depressed. Depression is at, I don't know if there's records of it being this bad at any other point in history. I'm sure they didn't keep records like that, but I would also say that just the general structure of society at that point, at that time, previous to this era, people weren't depressed. You can go to third world countries where you would think, and this is the big thing. This is an important point. It's another poignant point. Depression, anxiety, and really suicide, things like that, those seem to be first world problems. And that doesn't really make sense if you're thinking about it in the conventional way. Why is it that the most comfortable, secure countries in the world are the most depressed, the most anxious, and the most likely to end their lives? You would think if you go to some third world country and people are starving and they're living in shacks and huts or whatever, and there's wars going on all around them, and each day they wake up not knowing what's going to happen, wouldn't they be the ones that should be more depressed? More anxious? More likely to say, fuck it, I'm out? And so if you're being honest, you have to ask the question, why is that? And the answer to me is that life has a purpose. And struggle is a part of that purpose, if not the purpose. When you look at the zoo, and I use the example of the zoo a lot because I love animals. I'm fascinated by them. I always have loved animals. And I think I went to the zoo a couple times as a kid, but really I had never been as an adult. And so my girlfriend at the time and I went a couple years ago to the Baltimore Zoo, and I was actually very excited. I wanted to see chimps and gorillas and elephants and giraffes and cheetahs in real life. It wasn't brew at the zoo. It wasn't a drinking event. We didn't bring kids. It was just two adults going to look at animals. I was excited. I got a souvenir shot glass and everything. But when I got there, I actually felt sad. And I'm not the type of person, for anybody who's familiar with this show, to be like I'm not a sympathetic guy. I'm not always feeling sorry for people. I felt bad for these animals. I was that guy that was sitting there being like, this seems wrong. You're looking at a cheetah on a sidewalk. You're looking at an elephant walking around in a parking lot, literally. It's like mostly cement. And these elephants are shaking their heads, doing this weird, like what appeared to me to be like some type of nervous reaction. And I actually Googled it and found that it is something that elephants in captivity do when they're anxious. And you would think that a cheetah having all of his needs attended for. You don't have to hunt cheetah. We feed you every day at 3. An awesome meal. A nice fresh lamb leg from Safeway, or wherever they feed these things. Elephants just have a big trough of fucking grass and leaves or whatever elephants eat. And you don't have to walk 10,000 miles to find water. Elephants, we got water right here. See that puddle over there? In the driveway? Go drink over there. You're good. Hang out and enjoy your life. And they hate that. That is an important thing to note. When you put animals in an environment where everything is taken care of for them, They become depressed. They become anxious. They lose a sense of purpose. An elephant doesn't want to have all of the grass and the leaves shoved down his face from some zookeeper. He doesn't want to live in a 100-foot by 100-foot or however big the thing is. Bigger than that, I'm sure, whatever. But not big enough, obviously. Not the size of the continent of Africa. Big enough at the Baltimore Zoo. And not have to travel thousands of miles and be like, I feel like I remember there's a puddle over there, like 600 miles that way. Follow me. We got it. That's what they're supposed to be doing. And that gives them a sense of purpose. That gives them a reason to live. That's what makes an elephant an elephant. Likewise with the cheetah or any other animal. But the cheetah's supposed to hunt. The cheetah can run 60, 70, 80 miles per hour or whatever they run, fast as hell. They chase down a gazelle in the savannah or whatever. The Serengeti, just naming Africa-sounded things, wherever they live. And they're coordinating with other cheetahs. And they catch one. And they have this sense of like, I'm alive, baby. And they're able to provide for their families, and that gives them a sense of purpose. But now they don't have that. Now you're just a useless cheetah sitting in a cage. And that's what we are as human beings right now on an ever-increasing scale. The idea of having everything taken care of for you seems appealing. A very utopian style of looking at the world. To say, dude, just imagine if you didn't have to worry about money. If you didn't have to worry about paying for rent. If you didn't have to worry about paying for food. All that is taken care of, and now you just have all day, every day to do whatever it is that you feel like you want to do. Well, that sounds great. Except now you have removed the point of life. You could make the argument that, no, dude, you can, like, if you want to make music, now you just can make music. You don't have to work and then do music on the side. Okay, I'm open to that. But here's the other thing I'd like to call into question, and this is the struggle itself. If you notice, every single thing in life that's good for you sucks in the moment. Think of the best foods. The best foods are not cheeseburgers and milkshakes and candy bars and Sprite. No, the best foods are things that you eat while wishing you were eating something else, but you know that this is the better thing. So there's a certain level of struggle as opposed to indulgence. If you want to be in shape, being in shape is great. Getting in shape, not that great. You have to work out on a consistent basis while also eating things that you'd much rather be eating other things instead. Every single thing. And working out is the best example, I think, because people say that when you're building muscle, what's actually happening is you are actually tearing that muscle a little bit by exerting it beyond what it's used to. So you're making little like micro tears in the muscle. And just like they say, when you break a bone, it comes back stronger. Same thing with your muscles. You put your body through a situation that it's not used to. And that overexertion of your current limitations causes the body to rebuild stronger. You're basically putting your body through a forced adaptation process. You're telling your body, hey, currently you're built to live the lifestyle that I currently live, which is sit down and fuck around on the computer and go to work and, whatever. But now I'm telling you, me, that You have to be able to go to the gym 5 days a week and do this amount of weight and this blah, 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 blah. And your body goes, oh shit, okay, I guess I'll adapt to that. You are forcing your body to adapt to your new chosen lifestyle. And then you see the physical transformation as a result. Everything in life that is worth having requires some level of sacrifice and some level of struggle. I didn't make it that way. And everything in life that comes easy and requires no sacrifice or no struggle is of no value. They say the best things in life come free. Free of money, yes. Not free of time, not free of conscience. Even love. Love requires sacrifice. Love requires struggle. Meeting a girl at a bar and thinking she's hot and asking her out and dating for a couple months while you're infatuated with each other, that's easy. But at a certain point, if you want the relationship to work, it requires sacrifice. It requires not going out with the next chick that you find hot at a bar. And instead saying, sorry, other also hot chick at the bar. I already have this chick from the bar. But I'm not going to lie, the honeymoon phase has worn off for both of us. And now we are in the midst of a process of work together. Not a bad work, but a good work. The same way working out is good. It leads to something better than indulging in watching Netflix and drinking a milkshake, of course. But it's harder. So I brought up these different examples of how science, in an effort to make the world an easier place to live, has not succeeded necessarily in making it a better place to live. And look, I'm not sitting here saying I'd rather exist in the year 1000 AD or 0. I think I'd be fine if I did, though. I wouldn't know what I was missing. And in many ways, there's no real way to know. In many ways, I may have been happier. I don't know. I don't know. There's no way to know. I can't imagine that every single human being in the history of humanity before electricity and running water was sitting there be like, dude, life sucks. I mean, in reality, we're kind of the first generation, if you want an example of this, we're kind of the first generation that it is like popular. It's a popular thing to say. Dude, I don't even know if I want kids. Like, I couldn't bring my kids into a world like this. Mind you, you go to Mexico, you go to the Middle East, you go to poorer countries that are quote unquote worse off. They have no problem having kids, dude. And their lives are way harder than you. I always laugh when people say that. Dude, I don't know if I could bring my kids in this world. Dude, 1,000 years ago, having a kid was like a coin flip if he was going to make it past infancy. It's exaggeration, but you get what I'm saying. And there were no safety nets and air conditioning and clean drinking water guaranteed and food on the table guaranteed. There was none of that. But people were having kids. Now, even though I just said I kind of laughed to myself and at them, because I say this exact point when people say that, is, dude, how can you possibly sit here with a straight face and tell me that this right now is the worst time in history to have a kid, as opposed to any other point in history? But now I'm going to actually walk that back and say, now that I'm thinking about it, maybe everything I just listed is the problem. Maybe it is the worst time in history to have children. Not because life itself is harder or that you're more likely to not survive, but perhaps the precise opposite. What if right now is the worst time in history to have a child? Because there's no purpose. We've lost our purpose as a society. I was watching a kind of like YouTube video. I call that reading. That's my version of reading. I was reading the other day. And this guy was talking about the movie Office Space. And that movie came out in kind of the late 90s. And he brought up a bunch of other movies that all kind of dealt with that same thing. And it seemed to be a big theme or a big plot line at that time in history. You had movies like Fight Club, American Beauty, which I just watched the other day. Lots of movies like that. Falling Down was a movie that came out maybe a couple years earlier. They're all based around a protagonist that is just completely done. Just completely disaffected. Completely apathetic to the world around him. He has no purpose. Office Space and Fight Club. They're just guys that work desk jobs. They hate their lives. They have no purpose. Same thing with American Beauty. Same thing with Falling Down. And the process of the movie is the guys in every one of these movies letting go and just saying, you know what? Fuck this. I'll quit my fucking job. Fuck my boss. I'm going to go out and do something I give a shit about. And I don't care that it's less secure or less safe to do so. In the context of Fight Club, it was literally the act of getting your ass beat and putting yourself in a situation where you either had to kill or be killed or fight or get beaten up. That was freeing to them to just have a fucking struggle. Just have an obstacle to overcome so they could actually feel some level of accomplishment, a purpose. And I don't think it's a coincidence that that type of sentiment seemed to be bleeding over into like so many of the most popular Hollywood movies at that time in the 90s. Because the 90s economically were a very comfortable time. Brad Pitt, Tyler Durden himself, in Fight Club, says, we are the middle children of history. We have no great war. Our great war is with ourselves. Our Great Depression is our lives. And I would certainly venture to say things haven't gone up since then. Technology has only increased. And you have this question, well, what happens when virtually every job that would normally go to a person just starting out in the workforce with no skills, that's trying to gain skills but just needs an income, but now, self-checkout at the grocery. I know this sounds like a boomer argument. I'm not arguing it from a boomer standpoint. I'm arguing it from like an actual philosophical standpoint. As I said, all the proponents of automation in technology and in labor say, look, we might automate this, but then you're going to need a whole new thing. Like, they'll use Amazon delivery drivers as a thing, or truckers. Like, well, we can automate the trucks. But hey, once we automate the trucks, we're still going to need somebody to oversee those delivery trucks. We're still going to need a human being to manage these automated trucks. Okay. You're not going to need one guy per truck, though. Currently, you need one guy per truck. In this hypothetical future of automated truck drivers, you could have one guy overseeing a fleet. He's the fleet manager. I don't know how many trucks that would be. I'm not a trucker. Now, who do you love? Be sweet if I was, though. But now you've replaced 10 jobs with one. And guess what? There probably already is a fleet manager. So you haven't created one. You've just eliminated 10. And so in this hypothetical world where less and less jobs are needed and more people are in need of a livelihood, perhaps the only solution is to provide for them. And that doesn't sound like a life worth living, to be honest. It also seems unavoidable, however. Going back to the whole idea of working out, I also find it interesting that obesity is a leading cause in death. It's one of the unhealthiest things you can be is obese. Why is that? And why is it that we find physically fit people more attractive? So nature itself, evolution itself says that being obese is not a good thing. You're going to die sooner. You're going to be less viable to reproduce. And what is obesity a symptom of? Obesity is a symptom of comfort, really, and overabundance. And so nature itself, just through that's one example. But nature itself says, look, we value things that are struggling, that are fit for their environment, to contend with their environment. And if you are something in your environment that is too comfortable, you die off because nature doesn't value comfort. Nature doesn't value comfort. Nature values struggle. Again, I didn't make it that way. I just can't help but notice that that is the way. And there's got to be a reason for that. There's got to be a reason why a cold beer after a hard day's work seems a lot colder than a cold beer after a day of doing nothing but drinking cold beer. You feel better. You feel like you've done something. You feel like you have a reason to exist. And I'm not saying there's necessarily a malicious intent with the advancement of technology, making life more and more comfortable, making us more and more able to deal and bypass any level of struggle, whether it be psychological things like depression, anxiety, whether it be physical things. You're supposed to die. Think about that. You're not supposed to live forever. You're supposed to die. Now, I'm not saying every single person at the first sign of any type of health issue should just be left to die. Of course not. Of course not. But I think that's a good example of what is the limit. When medical technology gets to the point where we can extend people's lives for far beyond what is natural, at what point do you say, okay, we're good? I know that sounds like a cold thing to say. I don't mean it that way. I'm asking, again, a philosophical question. Because, again, what we're doing is we're playing God. And that kind of goes back to the Garden of Eden, the story of Adam and Eve. Eating from the tree of knowledge. What was that a metaphor for? I, like many people, don't take that literally. I don't take those stories literally. I believe they are parables. I believe they're stories within which have an immense amount of wisdom and knowledge to absorb. And what was that story trying to tell you? That humanity fell from paradise. Why? Because we were tempted to eat from the tree of knowledge. Now, I don't think it's an accident that it was the tree of knowledge. Could have been the tree of anything. Could have been an oak tree. Could have been the tree of starburst. It could have been the tree of anything, really. It was the tree of knowledge. Why knowledge? Why is it that if you look at this from a metaphorical angle, a symbolic angle, why is it that human beings, God's favorite creation, fell from grace, from paradise? When they defied his orders, when Eve was tempted by the devil, who told her, you could be on the same level. If you ate from this tree, you would be like a God. You would be like the angels in the heavens. Why would a God that truly loved you make you exist on this level and not have all the knowledge that he has? What makes him so special? What kind of father would do that to his children? And so she said, yeah, okay. And she ate from it. I look at that and I think, could this be a metaphor for human beings taking into our own hands the role of nature and God? Placing themselves on the level of God. You see this even with how people talk about science. If you listen to how people talk about science, and I love science, all I do is talk about numbers and stuff like that. Anybody who watches this show knows that. But I actually like science. I actually am a science-minded person, I believe. Precisely because of the fact that I don't blindly trust science. Because blindly trusting something, blindly accepting something is an act of faith. That's not an act of science. That's not a scientifically minded person. So when people who claim to love science also say things like, trust the science, don't question it, what do you know, shut up and take it, well, that sounds a lot like, a nun at a church, more so than a scientist. But you see how people have this religious adherence to science. The experts. We look at them as divinities, as godlike figures that cannot be questioned and shall not be questioned. You have no right, you have no place to challenge them. While at the same time, you can mock God and you can mock believers in God all you want. We've said God is a joke and science is a new God. Science is just us. Science is man's observation of the world around him. Isaac Newton did not invent gravity, he discovered it. You may not know this, but an apple still fell from a tree to the ground at the same rate, in the same amount of time, for millions and millions of years before Isaac Newton ever discovered why. Same thing with the orbits of the planets, same things with the formation of the sun and black holes. All of this around us already exists. We're just figuring it out. And yet somehow we've crossed into a point where the figure outers, us, have ascended in our own minds above the thing we're figuring out. Whenever man interferes in God's work, he tends to fuck it up a little bit. Not in every example, but the big examples, yes. As far as the general theme of this episode, whatever this episode is, again, this is Thursday Thoughts. If you come on this channel and you subscribe, you will see that many days, perhaps most days, we do deep dives into specific subjects. As I said, we did a deep dive into the Fulton County election fraud accusations on Monday. We did a deep dive into, Democratic options for the 2024 election. We did a deep dive into the lab leak theory for COVID yesterday. And today, we're just talking about playing God. My name is Jimmy Solesky, live from the studio. Till next time, peace.